Well, hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region, and welcome to this Free State Colorado interview. Today I'm joined by Rhonda Solis, member of the Aims Board of Trustees, former Weld County School District 6 board member, former Colorado's 8th Congressional District Board of Education member, and current co-chair of Greeley Demands Better. Well, Rhonda, I hope you are well, and thank you for joining me today.
Hello, Brandon. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, the biggest story in Greeley and really northern Colorado is the Cascadia Project. This controversial plan to transform West Greeley into a taxpayer funded entertainment hub is being met with opposition from Greeley residents and community members who worry about the risk to the future of the city. Rhonda and myself are co chairs of Greeley Demands Better, which has submitted enough petitions to the to spur a special election on February 24th. Well, Rhonda, can you explain why you got involved in challenging the Cascadia Project?
So my background's in education, obviously. I've been elected to boards where, I have had to be the steward of taxpayer money, which I take extremely seriously. And someone invited me to a meeting to learn more about this project, which I had never heard of, which, I'm ashamed to say I didn't hear about it, but then I also can see why, because there wasn't a lot of transparency. There wasn't a lot of information out there. So of course it just wasn't on my radar, which unfortunately is true for a lot of people in Greeley. So once I started hearing more about it, I mean, it sounds exciting, having this entertainment district. I think what gave me a pause was how they were funding it, though, and the fact that we would be carrying so much risk. And so I wanted to learn more about that. And as I reached out to people and were asking questions, I started learning that, yeah, we're carrying the biggest part of this risk, which was unusual because you have this developer who has a lot of background in doing, projects. So why wasn't he funding it more? And that was the biggest question I was getting from community as, why are we putting up some of our Greeley buildings and institutions to fund this possibly when we have, this businessman who wants to do that? And he actually benefits greatly from this project. And so that was, I started doing more questioning and asking. And, I'd never heard of a P3 agreement, which is what the home of the Eagles right now was requiring to, make a bigger commitment to the Eagles. And a P3 agreement is a public private agreement where it's 50-50 risk, 50-50 profit benefit. And so I was like, why would we not demand that? Why are our city council members not standing up for us as community members and making sure that if we're going to invest in this, and if for some reason it doesn't come to fruition the way people are hoping, we're going to be on the hook for that. So I was really concerned and thought I better get more involved.
Oh, that's great. And I definitely applaud you for stepping up and getting involved and really being a voice for the community because unfortunately we have so many instances across Colorado and even here in Greeley, unfortunately, where city government kind of does their own thing outside of the public purview. One of the big criticisms of Cascadia, like you mentioned, is the lack of transparency or just really the lack of public involvement from the beginning. I mean, that was one of the things I think that shocked me and really made me interested to get involved and to try and do something about this because here we have the city making a huge financial investment on the backs of the taxpayers. Ultimately, if things don't work out, we're paying for it and we live here. So we should have a say in what's happening. And it just seems like things like this happen so fast behind closed doors where all these meetings between developers, between special interest groups, between city officials, city managers, maybe city council members, and the public's the last to know ultimately. I mean, is that kind of an accurate, would you agree with that?
I would totally agree with that. And, I have been part as a member of the district of District 6 when I was a board member. And when I first got on, we didn't have a lot of trust in the community. The community didn't trust us for those same reasons: lack of transparency, lack of communication, which was very fair. But our charge was to change that reputation, and that's what we did. And then we were able to come together with community members and go look at Kalamazoo, Michigan, and their whole thing that they do for scholarships for every child that graduates from a Kalamazoo high school. And we're like, how do we replicate that? So we had people from the city, people from the county, people from the school district, people from the chamber, business leaders, community leaders, all take a trip to Kalamazoo, Michigan to learn how they did this project and how could we replicate it here, which is kind of what we did in the downtown area. And it's been very successful. And we got so many different voices at the table. That's not what you're seeing with this project. And that was a huge concern for me also.
Well, I think that's such a key point, right? Not having that community involvement, not really having that transparent, open dialogue with the people you're asking to pay for this project. And like you said, you have this well-moneyed effort on the part of the developer and other interests out there to come in and say, we're going to transform part of your city. It's not being used right now. We're going to turn it into this big entertainment hub. And, it's going to have a hockey rink, big hockey rink, with lots of sheets of ice, as they keep saying, and a water park, an indoor water park here in, very arid, dry Colorado, indoor water park, and a big hotel that's going to be pretty expensive. And of course, it's all going to be looking really nice, like a luxury resort. We're going to attract people from all over the state, all over the country to come here. But the city will own it. They'll have all the risk, and maybe they'll get some reward down the line. You get to profit off of it. Of course, we know the hockey team, which I'm a fan of the Colorado Eagles. I've been to many and many of their games, but at the same time, I think it's there's a fine line between, a private company or a private developer or a private organization coming in, a private business coming into the city and saying, hey, we need your help to get this project done, and you're going to assume all this risk. And if it doesn't work out, well, tough luck, and what's going to happen there is potentially really bad for the city of Greeley. Can you talk a little bit about some of the risk that the city of Greeley or the taxpayers, the people of Greeley, have with this whole Cascadia project?
Well, and I think you have to put into the picture what's been happening around us. So, right now, the Eagles play at Blue Arena, which is the Ranch Events Complex. They're actually in phase 2 of their development of making things bigger. So, they're going to have a new convention center, they're going to have a hotel, they're going to have a larger event plaza, an amphitheater, parking, and more youth hockey ice. Then you look at what happened in Windsor and Future Legends and their whole prospect that went bankrupt. And then if you want another bigger scenario that kind of compares to us, that also compares to the funding mechanism, look at the First Bank Center in Broomfield and what happened there. So you have all of these different things to look at as possible success stories or failure stories and competition. And I had totally forgot, but I just read this article. Do you remember Crystal Rapids that used to be in Loveland? So it was
Um,
like
go
it
ahead.
was there. It started like in 1993, and it was over by U.S. Bypass 34 in Boyd Lake, and it was there for 12 years and went bust. Now, there are people talking about bringing something back. Maybe something like some whitewater adventure, since it's kind of by Boyd Lake. So there is some competition that could be there. But again, it only took 12 years for that to go bankrupt. And their biggest thing was they said they had a lot of competition from Waterworld, which is in Denver. People want to travel more to those areas. There's a lot of different things to do. But if you look at people traveling here, okay, then we're going to have the Blue Arena, which kind of offers the same thing. We don't have that center in Windsor because that's not really happening. And so, what else competitively do we have for people to be drawn to this region? I mean, we're kind of repeating what's already here. It's not really creating anything new and exciting. I mean, they talk about some things, but will that come to fruition? I don't know. So I think it's a big concern. And I think as we talk about the funding mechanism, I mean, even their own third party feasibility study is showing concern about it not being able to really do what it says it's going to do. And in the first few years, if it's a deficit, then guess who carries that debt? We do. Now, some people, there's two things that you and I have both been accused of. One, we're anti-growth, which is not true. I think this project sounds like it's a possibility. It's not really down my avenue, but I know it's not always about me. I know growth is going to happen. It's inevitable. Our biggest thing is, though, is it transparent? Is it something that we all say, yeah, we would be excited for that? So that's, one part of it. And so I think for us as a community, and let's look at business. If a business is not successful, which I know business is risky and sometimes there's no reward if there's no risk. But if a business doesn't work out, then what? They declare bankruptcy. It's, they have to go to their funders. What if a city fails at this? What happens to us? What happens to the things we mortgaged? How much debt does this put on us? Do we have to increase taxes for other things because they use some of our general fund money to help the deficit of this plan that didn't come to fruition? So then what happens? And, I know the city of Greeley, and I talked to the water and sewer person at the last city council meeting, and he was telling me, yeah, water is not a big deal. We're fine, because I talked about the water park. But then I'm like, okay, look at what day it is. We're not out here shoveling snow. We have people showing up to the council meeting in shorts. There is a water issue. And when I was on the Leadership Northern Colorado, I took that class a few years ago. Even back then, water was a big conversation with all the residential thing happening in Severance and the stuff going on in Johnstown, all of these communities around us. Water is going to be a big conversation that we're all going to have in this state.
No, those are all great points for sure. There's so many concerns and so many different avenues to go down here. But I think ultimately you hit the nail on the head with one of the biggest concerns is the transparency and then who's on the hook if the project fails, right? Like this is the Colorado Eagles and the people who are operating all of this are it's a for-profit business, right? And so if they fail, if things don't work out, well, yeah, they have their legal remedies and plans in place for that happening, right? But yeah, as a city, what do we do? There's so many parts of Greeley that are maybe, I wouldn't say underdeveloped, but maybe neglected might be the right word. Especially on the east side of town, kind of where I'm at, we have so many streets that are unpaved and so many potholes and places that really need some repair and need some TLC from the city. And I heard it a bunch this last year when I ran for city council, door knocking with people, and they say, yeah, the city's never they haven't repaired this road in 20 years. It's one of the worst potholes. And I heard that on so many different streets, and there's so many parts of the city that really need that investment into it. And then to find out, well, we have the city government already spending millions of dollars on a decision that they made without asking the taxpayers to develop this project, to hire the lawyers and the planners and to go ahead and take on this debt. Do you want to talk a little bit about that funding mechanism?
So the funding is really concerning. And I think that part of it is what is the stickler for many people. It's not that they're anti hockey or anti growth or even anti this project. It really is the funding mechanism, because right now, with the feasibility studies that we've seen, and there's like maybe three, and I think there might be another one coming out. There are lots of questions as to whether the water park is self-sustainable, the hotel is, self-sustainable. There are certain percentages of, visitors that you have to have, and if you don't meet that, then it's not going to happen. And one of the things that they really tout is jobs, which that is amazing, but what exactly are the jobs that we're talking about? Are these jobs that would actually pay a salary that you could buy a house? Maybe not in this new housing development that they're talking out there, because it sounds pretty pricey and out of my price range. But in Greeley, could a teacher afford, a house in that area? No. Could somebody working in that temporary construction job come back to our community and be part of our community? Probably not. So I'm concerned the entertainment industry can be successful, but even like we've seen recently in the mountain areas, it's hard to pay their workers well and pay a livable wage. So what kind of jobs and longevity jobs are we exactly talking about? And we haven't heard enough about that. So who are these people that are going to be working there? How will they actually make a living and live in our communities? Because obviously that's going to be ongoing jobs. And we know turnover is a big, huge thing in the entertainment industry. And so what happens as those jobs and those people are transient and come in and out, coming in and out. So I think there's lots of questions to us as community members, but the biggest stickler for many of us is just the funding mechanism. If we could put a pause on this project and figure out a different way to fund this, or a different, maybe a P3 agreement, where we're, putting just as equal risk as the developer, which he's not right now, that would at least be a little bit more fair. I think the other part for me is that before, when we talked about the Kalamazoo Promise, it was all about our community, our business community, our school district. Our city council members were in there fighting for us and figuring out, how do we create this for our community? What's been disturbing about this is that it's so far west. who is really going to benefit from this? I mean, and as it draws people in, will they really come into Greeley, or will they just kind of hit I-25 and go to Loveland or go to Johnstown or go to Fort Collins? I mean, there's lots of things on I-25 that don't really bring you into a community to spend your money. So then what happens to our downtown area that we just, did all this work in and we're so proud of and so excited, and we have so many things downtown. So what happens to that industry? What happens to that area, those businesses? How are we promoting them, and what the effect is going to be? And I think historically, as you've seen these things pop up into communities, these are the things that end up happening that really have a long lasting effect. And so I think a lot of us that are really proud Greeley people really want our community to benefit from this, something that we can actually partake in and afford to partake in. And is it going to benefit us as a community and even our school district? And those are questions that just have not measured up. And so I want them to fight harder for me as a Greeley resident, because that's who you represent. You represent me as a Greeley City Council person, and I want you fighting for me, not for Johnstown, not for Windsor, not for any of that. You fight for me.
Well, and that's such a good point too. The whole Cascadia, it's so far west, it's as far west in Greeley as you can get, that it's actually closer to downtown Loveland, to downtown Windsor, to downtown Johnstown, or that whole, Shields area by the highway, of course, all of
Sarah,
that. So, Centera. So if somebody comes to a hockey game or a concert or some sort of venue there, then they, where are they going to go get dinner? It's very unlikely they're going to drive another 20 minutes east to go out to Greeley to find a little restaurant out here. So yeah, it doesn't seem like it doesn't make the most sense in terms of benefiting the city overall, in terms of really trying to provide this. But yet all of us here in the city are really on the hook for it, regardless if we're going to see any type of benefit from it. But I think one of the big issues too is this use of certificates of participation. And that's something that I've been really concerned about when I heard about that, because what they do basically is part of the selling point of the Cascadia is they say, well, it's not going to raise taxes, right? No taxpayers are going to really have to pay for it. That's what they say. But of course, part of the reason they do this is through these certificates of participation, where they take out, say, for example, instead of a 30-year loan, which would require a vote of the people and approval by the people, thanks to our taxpayers' Bill of Rights, instead, they take out 31-year loans. And because they're 1-year loans, they don't necessarily have to take out or ask the voters for approval. And that's just an example. I'm not saying that's exactly what's happening here, but that's how a certificate of participation really works. And there were so many questions. I mean, I'm sure you had a similar experience going to these city council meetings, and people were asking, people in good faith, citizens, members of the community, people who've lived here their whole lives were asking city council members, can you explain this financing? Can you explain how these certificates of participation work? Can you explain how this is? And I mean, the looks on the city council members' faces, at least from what I saw, it didn't seem like they really could answer that. And they couldn't. They didn't know, because it's so complicated and so complex. And that's one of the big issues and one of the big concerns. All these big decisions behind closed doors that are complex and confusing, and yet, we're all on the hook for whatever happens to it. So it seems like it doesn't just seem there's something so wrong about it from my perspective in terms of the proper role of government. We should have a government that serves the people, like you said, that's open and transparent, and ask the people for permission before getting involved in some sort of project that potentially could cost us a lot. I mean, really a lot in the long term. I mean, what's your
well,
perspective on that?
yeah, well, and I think the hard part is when we first started asking questions, we started showing up at city council meetings. We weren't met with, oh, you know what? Let us help you get more information. Let's meet. We were almost treated like we were like stupid. And why would you even bother showing up? Why are you asking me this? COPs, we do that all the time. But we have some community members that really did a lot of research. And yes, COPs are kind of the usual business, stuff that you do at the city or government to fund things. But the caveat is a lot of those COPs are to directly affect the things that are in the COPs, like to make them bigger or to make them better or to grow that area, or it's specifically for that area and that building or something. That's usually what COPs do. This is the first time I've seen where COPs are all of these things over here and is to fund that way over there. And these are not even going to get touched. They're not going to get improved on, anything like that. It's all going to happen out there. So I think that was kind of we were treated like we didn't know what we were talking about. And even so, there were people that were doing lawsuits against community members that were pushing and asking questions. People that worked for the city were afraid to sign the petition, even though they agreed and they had concerns. So there's a lot of backlash that community members were concerned and being involved in this, but they still wanted to be involved. And so we still had people showing up to meetings, having conversations. Lots of people signed petitions. And that's why we're having this special election. And I think the hard part is that wasn't even enough to get them to pause or to say, you know what, we need to listen. Let's have another conversation. Maybe we do need to look at this a different way. And so I think that's a huge concern. And so we have community members that are really upset that they were treated so collectively, like they just didn't matter. Their voice didn't matter. Their lens didn't matter, even though it's their money, it's our taxpayer money. We weren't supposed to have a voice in this, and that's unfortunate.
Definitely. I mean, that's such an important point. I'm really glad you framed it that way because that's exactly the issue for so many people. And then when the citizens of Greeley wanted to have a voice, wanted to do something about this, and started gathering petitions, started getting organized, and as a community said, "Hey, let's have the voter approval on this," right? So people got together, organized this first petition campaign, and then the city came in and said, "No, we're gonna hire this." Legal person and come in and have this attorney and make this decision at the court level to say that this is something you can't petition. You can't actually have a say. The people can't actually have a voice. And that was really the first petition where the citizens tried to say, hey, we want to have a say in this project. But thankfully, because there's so many great activists and volunteers and people who are involved in this project, a second petition was created, and that's kind of led to where we are now with this special election coming up. So it's very interesting, and I think it should be exciting for people to see that there's an opportunity for the community and for individuals to have a voice, to be able to stand up, speak out, almost this David versus Goliath type of story where the people want to have a say in the future of their community. And I think that's such an important thing. But do you want to talk a little bit about the feasibility studies? Because along with the transparency issue, the cities has access to some data that they weren't really releasing to the public from at least from what I've seen initially, and through some open records requests and some other things, it seems like some of these um, facts and these studies are coming to light now, and some of it doesn't necessarily look good for Cascadia, especially in the near term.
Well, and I think again, it was thankfully for Greeley Demands Better, and Greeley Deserves Better, that we Cora requested, because we wouldn't have had this information without that. And mind you, you do have to pay for that. So even though this is our information, even though it was our taxpayer money that paid for some of these feasibility studies, we weren't able to see them. And I think the fact that we were so far into the project already, and now these feasibility studies are coming out when it should have been like way back when, because it has some really good information in there as far as what the forecasts were. And although some of it seems positive, if the projections come out exactly the way they are, if the percentage of people show up to the water park, if they have a certain amount of events at the event center, if enough people show up to the Eagles, if there's a certain amount of food and beverage that is sold, all of those things have to be working together for this to be successful. And so that stuff is kind of, yet maybe that could happen. It could happen. It might happen. But I think the biggest thing is, the study showed that there's going to be at least a 9.5 million or as much as 15.8 million short in the first few years of the project. So who covers that deficit? Who fills in that gap? And right now, the economy is a little shaky. I have concerns about that. My kids have concerns about that. So as we're trying to watch what the economy does, which lots of people think that we are going into a downfall, that's something that we're really going to have to pay attention to. And is the timing of this the best? Which the study says, no, this isn't the best time for this. So I think there's a lot of things that we could look at. There are some off ramps that could help us, that we could actually go a different direction and not go through with this project and maybe do it differently. I think that those are some serious things that we need to talk about. But I think what's important is that this third party is not hired by Greeley Demands Better. We didn't hire them. It wasn't our study. We just looked at the study that they did, and the projections are, like I said, very concerning on lots of different avenues. The biggest thing is the shortfall in the very beginning. And if you look at something like Crystal Rapids that went down in, just a short amount of time, we don't get to see profit for years down the road. So then what happens? And in all reality, the city of Greeley had to do a little maneuvering just to cover their budget for this last year. And so if you're in a deficit and you need to balance everything and things are a concern, I don't see us putting this kind of money into this kind of project right at this point. And so I think I would tell people go to greeleydemandsbetter.com, look at the information, look at the feasibility study. Also, let's make sure to mention it is a special election. Ballots will be starting to go out on February 2nd. They will be due on the 24th at 7 p.m. They must be in their hands at the city or else it doesn't count. There's also a concern on how this election is going to be run. The city hasn't done an election in a long time. It's usually the county, which we've had a lot of faith in the county. The county's done an amazing job around our elections. But even in our petition drive, we saw people's signatures get kicked out. And these are regular voters at the county level that have never been kicked out or their ballot has never been turned away. And so just the process is concerning. So it's going to be our responsibility to be diligent and making sure that we fill this out, make sure we talk to our neighbors, make sure that they turn in their ballot and it's there in time. And I think it's important for people to know, because I know people are asking a lot of questions, what does this do? So the initiative is 1A. We are asking you to vote yes to repeal this ordinance. If this goes through, if this passes, the contract is between the city and the developer, and it's in contingent on this PUD zoning. And what we're going to be doing is repealing that zoning. If the ordinance is repealed, there can be no PUD zoning and the project will not move forward. It will have to halt for a year and cannot reapply for the same type of zoning for a whole year. So that would give us time to really push city council. If this is something you really think is going to make some money and it's the thing that you want to do, can we find a different way to finance it, a better way that doesn't put us at risk as much as it is right now? I know there's always risk when it comes to growth and development, so I do understand that, but we really do need to protect our citizens and make sure that we're protecting our tax revenue and that they are being stewards of our money.
Well said, definitely well said, Rhonda. And we definitely want people encourage you to vote yes on 1A. It's time for the people to have a say in terms of what's going on in our local government. Let's just kind of, pause things, make sure everything makes sense, make sure that the whole project is the right thing to do for the city, get all these questions answered. And, it's just moved so fast. Everything's moved, from my perspective, has just been moving so fast that the people, the public really hasn't had that opportunity to really understand the full implications of everything. And we really need to. And that is the proper role of government. And for anybody out there who's maybe more on the conservative side, Republican side, pro-liberty side, I would even say, is this really the proper role of government? I'd say it's not the proper role of government for the city to own a hotel and a water park. I mean, I would call it crony capitalism, and that those are all reasons to vote yes on 1A to really say, this isn't necessarily what our government should be doing, especially as you said, Rhonda, in this time when there's a lot of economic uncertainty. It seems like things are going in the wrong direction. Colorado's at a big risk of a recession. The country's kind of in a precarious state right now from an economic perspective. So what does this mean? I mean, are people going to be going out to these fancy hotels and water parks and concerts and hockey games that are pretty expensive, actually, if the economy really does tank, if it really gets really bad? Hard to say that that's what's going to happen. And then, of course, what about the rest of the city and our roads and the water and this and that? All these other issues, the flooding in downtown Greeley, all these other issues, this infrastructure that the city's been neglecting and instead focusing on this big shiny entertainment project. So I think there's so many reasons, regardless of anybody's political affiliation or perspective there, to vote yes, to give the public, give the people a say in this whole process. As we kind of wrap it up here, Rhonda, what other final thoughts do you have?
So, I know I'm just like you. I go to the grocery store and I complain that, my dollar is just not going as far, which means that I cut out extracurricular things. I don't get to do all that fancy stuff. I don't remember the last time I actually went on a vacation. So I have been kind of frugal with my money, knowing that, the financial stuff right now is a little concerning. And we still have a lot of people living paycheck to paycheck. And so this just does not seem like something that is going to really help grow and really nurture the people of Greeley. And I am a longtime resident. This is not a political thing for me. This is a community thing. And like I said, as someone who was an elected official, who was a steward of taxpayer money, that is a role that is extremely important, that you must take very seriously. You must have responsibility and you must be as transparent as possible. This is not your money. This is not your bank account. This is our bank account. And we must make sure that, things on the east side of Greeley, things on the north side of Greeley, those things are taken care of. And we have some things that definitely have been overlooked and for a long time not taken care of. So let's make sure that we have the best Greeley possible. We all need to live together. And, that's kind of what brought Brandon and I together. I don't think we've ever met before. So this was a community thing, a community concern that we both thought, we both need to get involved in this. And if we can be a voice for people and making sure that we are part of this discussion and part of this decision, then let's do this. And so that's kind of how we both got together. And thank you, Brandon, for this, doing this. I think it's really important. And it's important that people have a voice. And this is your chance to have a voice. Make sure you do your part and make sure you fill out your ballot. Vote yes on 1A and let's repeal this PUD. And let's have this discussion again about this financing of this project if this is the road we're going to go down.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rhonda. Thank you for your leadership on this and other things. And yeah, let's encourage people vote yes. And let's see what happens. And let's have a voice for the people of Greeley. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And let's keep people updated if there's anything else that comes up.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.